Dobrý večer z kempu. Po několikáté se potkáváme v tomto zvláštním režimu, tady bez diváků, ale já věřím, že sedíte u svých displejů, případně u mobilů, u počítačů a sledujete nás. Vzhledem k tomu, jaká nastala v České republice situace, jsme byli nuceni přejít do online režimu. To znamená, že pro vás připravujeme zvláštní přednášky, které je možné takhle uspořádat. Pořád tady máme zahraniční hosty. Snažíme se vám zpřístupnit, já tady už vidím paní profesorku, takže mě rozesmálo to, co tam dělá, tak se omlouvám. Snažíme se vám pořád zpřístupňovat ten obsah kempu. Otevřeli jsme novou webovou stránku kempuj.online. Vy tam najdete veškerý program, který připravujeme, už teď jsme tam zveřejnili ten dubnový a můžete tam najít i dodatkový obsah k tomu, co tady v kempu vidíte. To znamená, že se snažíme doplňovat přednášky dalšími fotografiemi, odkazy a tak dále. A taky saháme občas do archivu, například teď už tam najdete fotografie původního veletržního paláce. Najdete tam taky informace o předchozí přednášce, která byla s Korem Wagenárem o architektuře a zdraví. Bavili jsme se o tom, jak architektura a urbanismus ovlivňuje to, jak se ve městě máme, i kolika let se například dožíváme. Bavili jsme se o tom, jak se například rozvíjel Amsterdam do 18. století a jak se potom začal zlepšovat a měnit k lepšímu. Taky tam najdete úplnou novinku. Tu jsme tam přidali dneska. Je to aplikace, která se věnuje pohybu Pražanů z práce a do práce během právě té situace, během epidemie viru COVID-19. Ukázalo se, že mnoho Pražanů se přestalo podle nařízení vlády přesouvat do centra a z centra ven. A ty čísla jsou tam krásně vidět. V centru města je to dokonce 80% rozdíl oproti tomu normálu, takže určitě se na tu aplikaci podívejte, můžete si ji tam porovnat od 16.3. až do současnosti. Jsou to data, která vycházejí z dat od operátora, nebo jsou to informace, která vycházejí z dat od operátora T-Mobile. Data jsou anonymní a neveřejná, takže se nebojte, nikdo nevysleduje to, jak se po městě pohybujete, ale jsou velice vhodná pro to, jak monitorovat tu aktuální situaci. My je poskytujeme všem veřejným institucím, hlavně hygienikům, kteří díky tomu mohou například trasovat to, jak by se virus mohl po městě pohybovat a tak dále, což je určitě velice přínosné a zajímavé. Takže doporučuji kempuj.online, budeme tam dál přidávat obsah. Jak jistě víte, kemping s Ondřejem Cihlářem se nekonal včera, museli jsme ho z organizačních důvodů přesunout, ale už v dubnu bude další vydání a pozvání přijali sourozenci Třeštíkovi, Tomáš a Hana, takže to bude určitě velmi zajímavé vydání z pražské Letné, na to se těším. A rád bych ještě připomněl, že příští týden nás čeká kurz s Karolínou Vránkovou. To novinářka z Respektu, která pro kemp připravila kurz Jak psát o architektuře. Samozřejmě jsme museli kurz zase posunout až na podzim, ale ona řekla, že vás v tom nenechá, že přeci jenom pro vás ten kurz chce připravit, takže jsme nachystali online přednášku, ve které se dozvíme, jak psát o architektuře, aspoň ve zkrácené formě, a dostanete tam případně i nějaké zadání. Pokud se budete chtít rozhodnout se zapojit do toho kurzu, do té přednášky, budete moct poslat text a ona ty nejlepší zreviduje a potom je i zveřejníme, pokud s tím budete souhlasit. Takže určitě taky doporučuji. A teď už se pomalu přesuneme k dnešnímu programu. Jak už jsem zmiňoval, pokud jste viděli náš Instagram, kde vždycky informujeme o tom, co nás čeká dnešní večer, budeme se bavit o architektuře, o krajinářské architektuře. Dnes máme připravený druhý díl ze série Landscape Exchange. Je to série o krajinářské architektuře a pozvání tentokrát přijala architektka a urbanistka Robin Winogrond ze Studia Vulkan Landschapsarchitektur. Budeme se bavit tedy o krajinářské architektuře, o tom, jaké trendy aktuálně kolem ní panují, i o to, jaký tlak na ní je, protože krajinářská architektura se stala větším tématem, než byla dříve, právě z důvodu klimatických změn, právě z důvodu potřeby správy vody ve městě, třeba té dešťové, která už by se neměla splachovat do kanálu, ale měli bychom se naopak snažit udržet ji ve městech a podobně. Takže všechno tohle nám Robin poví. Ona je tedy krajinářskou architektou a spoluzakladatelkou švýcarského studia Vulkan, ale její mateřštinou je angličtina, takže se budeme bavit anglicky. Mimo té práce ve studiu Vulkan taky učí na Harvard Graduate School of Design. Ještě bych chtěl zmínit, že dnešní večer se koná ve spolupráci s galerií Norma Space. Partnery akce jsou Swiss Art Council, Ministerstvo kultury, Státní fond kultury ČR a hlavní město Praha a samozřejmě kemp, ve kterém se akce koná. A nyní už tady přejdu do angličtiny a přivítám Robin. So let me switch to English and welcome here in camp. I'm really happy that you decided to join us in this way and without the audience, but I hope that people are still watching us and they will be happy to ask some questions. I didn't mention that you can ask questions on slido.com. If you use hashtag #CampuiOnline, you will be able to join our chat room and you will ask some questions and I will see them and I will ask Robin. So Robin, thank you again and it's yours. I will ask you for a lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. This is a fascinating new experience, I think, for all of us. I've never given a lecture, which I enjoy doing very much, to my own laptop. So I hope there's a way to transfer the sense of the projects more or less through this medium. Just quickly to say that my grandmother is from Prague, so I always felt quite connected to the city, and I was very much looking forward to coming and being in that city again and meeting all of you. So we'll have to make do with this, and I certainly hope I can come another time. The lecture tonight, actually just to start, I was asked to talk about infrastructure, and in looking at the definition of infrastructure and looking at our projects, I realized that there's actually, I think almost every project is deeply entrenched in infrastructure. So I think that maybe a sign of our times is that we're quite in a very built environment, and the infrastructure is an inherent part of most of what we do. And you'll see that in our projects. And just a few words about this title, which is also focused in terms of the approach. It's a very personal approach, actually, myself and yes, one of my partners follows kind of a train of thought we've worked on for a while in search of geographical enchantment. And I will explain briefly what this means, and then I'll go into the lecture. We're quite interested in our everyday landscape, the one in which we all live, you there and we here, and it's the everyday landscape in which we work as an office. And they are usually quite banal, full of contradictions, and as designers for the projects, full of limitations. In addition, there's an entire series of stakeholders who have many demands on these sites. And in Switzerland, the sites are usually quite small. So we are always set in a project setting where we have these huge demands and a lot of conflicts, a lot of paradoxes, contradictions, and so on. And our general attitude is to see ourselves as moderators of these projects. We are not interested in hiding these contemporary conditions and making just a kind of a nice place for everyone to go, but on the contrary, in bringing these conflicts, contradictions, and paradoxes to the surface, in allowing them to be expressed in the design, and finding a design language which unites these different conditions and allow us to experience them. Because I guess the basis of this title you're looking at, and you see quite nicely in the image behind the title, our everyday landscapes are becoming more and more sterilized. They're becoming more and more standardized, and they're losing the ability to enchant us as people, to move us. So in addition to looking for an expression for these very complex conditions, we are also quite interested in making places which have a contemporary ability to move us and to give the landscape a voice. And I guess if one could sum up a bit our office, it would be to say that we are always riding on the cusp between pragmatism and poetics. And we are quite interested in imminently pragmatic solutions, but that have the ability to be poetic and to move us. So that being said, I will move into the lecture. Switzerland, where are we? We're working both in Switzerland and Germany, in fact, but we have our main office in Zurich. Most of us are in Zurich, and this is the image I was just describing, where you see the landscape in its more singular, unique way of the past, and how it becomes more and more standardized through laws, through large landowners, through all the conditions we have even in the urban settings, which become more and more sterile. And there's a well-known German photographer named Thomas Struth, who actually made this the content of a series of his photos. This is a series taken outside of Zurich, which he did, of what we consider to be the landscape. And of course, it's the agricultural landscape, and it's almost without a soul. But we still convince ourselves, we feel the need to convince ourselves, I'm going for a walk in the landscape and it's beautiful and it's moving and so on. And so we keep hanging on to certain imagery of our surroundings after they're long gone. And the question is, what happens when we begin to confront these everyday conditions? This is an international condition as well, sprawl. It's very, very typical in Switzerland. Sprawl is a major problem because of the mountains. You can't build on many places. And so we often find ourselves building and designing in such settings. What fascinates us is exactly this question of contradictions or understandings. And here I will show this and one more project site of ours with this a fascinating mix between nature and culture, if you want, or nature and infrastructure. You see a river, which is in a concrete basin, basically. You see the untamed vegetation because no one bothered to actually control it under the highway. And you see train tracks and a highway and a waterway and all these things crossing over the river, and then a pedestrian bikeway and so on. So everyone is trying to use these few square meters. And this image, we actually love it. We actually love this place because it's completely unique and completely crazy, and such a strange mix of imagery where nature actually takes on its own particular voice in a kind of interweaving with this infrastructural language. This is another project site of ours, which I'll show in a project today. It's the airport park, which we won as an international competition. And you see here a swamp and a wetland in front of a parking house. Sorry, my English has gone to pot. I'm American, but my English is not so good anymore. A parking building, and on top of it, the huge advertising and this overlay of imagery between natural and cultural, artificial, and so on and so forth. These are words we can't even really define anymore these days. So just before I go into the projects, there's been kind of a long series of interest, a strong personal interest of mine since the beginning of my studies has been the topic of atmosphere. And I quite like to read the new literature coming out. And this is an image from one of the more recent books. There's a kind of an international clique of architects basically working with the topic of atmosphere. And the editor of this book made a plea to us designers to put more atmosphere in our projects. And the reference image for this great plea was Eugène Attier, that's a famous French photographer from the 1920s in Paris. And then you have the sepia-colored photo, as if our project sites actually might look like this. But in fact, our project sites look like this. They're very boring. I mean, they're very banal, and they're just very somehow crass. And I'm sure you know it quite well from Czech Republic. And it's the question, well, how do we put poetry into our projects? So this expression, which is part of the title, is just something I came across in this book on some page. It's just mentioned in passing, but I found the term geographical re-enchantment quite fascinating and appropriate to what we were trying to do in our projects. And that is in the sense of geographical site-specific, and the re-enchantment meaning the ability to enchant us or to it's a re-enchantment. It's not in a historical way, but in a contemporary way to find this ability of place to move us, which you can see quite nicely in this image of the German painter Gerhard Richter. What does it mean to just be in a place and have that place speak to you in these small, tiny, simple conditions, a stair and a wall and a water? Or how does a place interact with us, and what is this marriage between the inner self in us and the outer world at which we build? And how can we as landscape architects learn to think in terms of this uniting of the viewer and the place? Because that's the only way to get it to move us, is to understand this interesting connection between these two worlds, the inner world and the outer world. And so for one of the projects, which I will also show today, we began thinking up our own landscape theory or something like this. At the bottom, there's a quite common thing. I think we all know there's the physical landscape. It's the nature, which forms an underlying carpet below all of our projects. The power of raw nature, the geomorphology, what's the topography doing, what's the layer stone doing, the wilderness, water, woods, etc. And on top of that, as we also quite well know as landscape architects, is the cultural landscape, the urban, political, social, and cultural landscape. It's planned and built by society, it's functional, and it's rational in its production of landscape. So coming out of these thoughts I just mentioned, we decided there maybe is something on top of that, which is, there are many explanations what's on top of that, the fourth dimension and the artist's version of landscape, etc. But we decided to put something we call the personal landscape, or the imaginative sphere, as a third layer on top of that. And it's the intellectual, emotional sphere of landscape. It's informed by memory, by experience, by longing. And we believe this belongs to all of the landscape experiences. So it's basically a kind of a tool which we don't use so explicitly, but interesting is it's not a theoretical tool. It's in fact a very concrete tool. It's a very, it's a way of approaching landscape, I would say. So with that being said, I'll now go into the projects. First one is the Tony School of the Arts. It's here in Zurich. And what you see, I've never given a lecture without a pointer, if I'm really honest, but I guess I have to learn to do that too today. So what you see is a very long building in the back. That's an old yogurt factory. And the building in the front is a new part of it, and it's been turned into a new School of the Arts. And we made the rooftop garden on top of this school, which is huge, absolutely huge. This is a plan of this building. You can't imagine, I can't remember the square meters, but it's an enormous roof, and it's filled with infrastructure. So the roof itself is a kind of infrastructure, a roof garden, and on top of that, all the buildings you see there are all infrastructural uses and indoor uses, and the garden has to weave between them. Here an image of the site. Actually, it's the view out my window, basically. This is Zurich here in the background. This is the School of the Arts, and that's housing on top of that. And this project came with many, many conditions, many, many constraints. And one of them was that it had to be built in no time. And so you have a kind of a strange production of nature, artificial production of nature, which then you plant in a setting, in a garden, a rooftop garden, and it becomes, so to speak, unfolds as nature. In one of the nearby tree nurseries, we had thousands of these boxes of plants, which were growing and preparing to be placed on this roof. So that the day the school opened, the architects, of course, take their most beautiful pictures and say goodbye, and they're finished with the project. And then on that day, our project began to decay. The boxes were placed, as you can see, and it was the beginning of the process of growth and decay. And as the boxes, which are wooden boxes, were kept, and as the plants grow, the boxes begin to decay. The plants burst out of them. They form the soil on which the trees are planted. And nature takes over and grows and expands and becomes a kind of a wilderness, an urban wilderness, which is an unexpected language to find on the rooftop in the middle of the city. The second project is very directly related to infrastructure. It's a competition we were able to win, actually the first week of Studio Vulkan, for a sound barrier wall on the western entrance to the city of Zurich. It was actually an artist competition for artists or architects. It's about a 1 kilometer long wall, and we were allowed to use metal or glass to fill a concrete frame, which the highway authorities have determined. There's a new law in Switzerland declaring that all loud or fast streets running past housing areas have to have one of these sound barriers. And the city of Zurich put in extra money to say we would like to make an art project out of this. So we call this the Poetics of Infrastructure. There's the site. It's, I think, the funniest site I've ever had. It's 50 centimeters wide and 1 kilometer long. So very particular kind of landscape, let's say a paper thin landscape. And this is the view of the street. Talk about everyday banal landscapes, offices, a bit of housing, parking lots, and so on and so forth. And so we had the idea to work with glass, and glass has a very particular property. It's something I've been working with since my studies in landscape architecture. I'm very interested in glass and water as materials which don't have visual properties of their own, but in fact take the visual properties of their surroundings. And this allows us to have a very a fascination, something like staring at fire or staring at the surface of water, a fascination for these materials because they never remain the same. They change with their surroundings. So we were looking at etched glass, which I'd actually used in my master's thesis, and looking at various degrees of etching this glass so that it would make a very rich reading of its surroundings. We call this project the Screen of Happenings. It's a nice title in German. And here we are during the competition making tests, making films and so on. We're standing out there minus, I don't remember, 10 degrees or something in December, holding up these panels of glass and trying to study how this could influence the visual atmosphere. And you see this, how it's capturing the change of seasons, the autumn, the winter. On the lower right, you see a landscape hill. You see lights of traffic. You see lights of office buildings, things moving in the wind. It's an entire series of imagery which is being abstracted and estranged from its original normality and turning it into a kind of a real-time painting. This is a wonderful quote from the most innovative musician, if we want to call him that, musician, thinker, John Cage. And we found it quite early in the competition, and I think it kind of inspired a bit the attitude. There's no such thing as an empty space or an empty time. There's always something to see, something to hear. In fact, try as we may to make a silence, we cannot. And this silence almost anywhere in the world today is traffic. If you listen to Beethoven, it's always the same. But if you listen to traffic, it's always different. And so this inspired this screen of happenings, of urban happenings, and how we could take the urban environment and have it cast onto this glass wall in these various facets and actually make a new experience for this urban peripheral situation. Here, from sunrise to sunset, all the different images which we were collecting and studying. Just to say, this project was stopped for several years, and next year it will go into the construction drawings. So you're looking at all the tests we've been doing, and the glass in these different etchings we are collecting from about 3 different countries, if not more. So what happens to an office building? What happens to sunset? What happens to autumn? What happens to street and traffic, office building, bike riders, rainy days, traffic lights, sunset. This next project was finished last year. It's a Museum of Natural History in the eastern part of Switzerland, Museum of Natural History. And the subtitle of this project is Natural History on a Highway Tunnel. Again, very directly related to infrastructure. It's quite a challenging topic because to make a small park about natural history implies that you're making a place where people immerse themselves in the topic of natural history. And at the same time, they're walking on a highway tunnel. They're walking on a highway tunnel. They're being surrounded by cars and all kinds of things. I'll show you the pictures here. This was the site before the park. It's not very big. It's kind of a slope, so it appears even smaller than it is. There's a beautiful back of a beautiful cathedral, but it's actually just the back of it across from the museum. And you see here in the aerial photo on the right, the new museum. And on the left, this protected church. And then you see single family housing, multifamily housing, school, sports facilities, a nursing home, all these kind of things. And here's this small site in which one should get lost, let's say, should lose themselves in the topic of natural history. How can one do that? So there's several means with which we tried to do this. And one of them is, if you see the edges on the bottom and on the top, basically to make a more dense vegetative plantings to kind of block out this heterogeneous setting so that people have a space with which they can immerse themselves in. And the second, I'll just go back here, you see these concrete pavers. It's based on the knowledge or the landscape tool of stepping stones, garden stepping stones, which we all know quite well. But instead of making them small, like a normal garden stepping stone, they're up to 7 meters large. So actually what that does is, as you know, when you step on stepping stones through a garden, you're very cautious, you're very tenuous and a bit, you know, like a tiger walking. And so the idea would be to set you off balance, not to make paths going from A to B where people can walk quickly and be chatting on their iPhones or something, but instead to make a place where you have to watch your feet, where you're become humble and put yourself inside of nature. And these concrete pavers become the carriers of an entire series of information about nature and artificiality. There's a beautiful expression in German. I don't know if people have German in school, but I will just say it. It doesn't translate as poetically in English. Natürliche Künstlichkeit, künstliche Natürlichkeit. It's a flipping of the words, natural artificiality and artificial naturalness. So it's a play on this double meaning and the complexity of that. And what you see here, this is just after planting, so it's in about 40 degrees in the summer, so it looks quite barren, but that's a part of the project. And what you see, for example, in the middle is an enormous quote from Darwin. Each letter is about 30 centimeters in height. And here are some kids running over these stones, and some of the stones embedded in the garden. And one of the first things talking about this dealing with nature and culture, nature and artificiality is, for example, the choice to use the Hydrangea plant, which you see in the front, because it's not a native plant. And we tried to use almost all native plants, but not all. But we had a problem that we weren't allowed to build on top of these tunnels, the highest point of the tunnels. We weren't allowed to use anything with woody roots. And so taking the hydrangea was a trick, because you could say it's not quite a woody plant. It's kind of more like a, you know, perennial flower. So we were able to use it on the entire site. And it's also a comment, because it's a non-native, on talking openly about the lack of naturalness in this park, because it's an artificial site. So we were dragged through the mud in the press because we didn't use only natural species. And there were people who wanted us to make a like a fake looking natural garden, the ones we all know with the little pond and the little whatever. And that's the only language that these ecologists thought we were allowed to use in this park. And we explicitly wanted to confront this and say, no, we're taking exactly the hydrangea, kind of like this, and say, look, let's talk openly about nature in the city today. And this woodland on the edges of the site are starting to come out now. They're just growing. These are just still, I think this year we'll have the first photos where it starts to fill in as a woodland. And now I'll tell you a few of the playing on the topic of nature and artificiality. One of them is that the most common stone in the eastern part of Switzerland is called Nagelfluh, and it's basically an organic, a natural concrete. So if you take concrete, which you see in the middle picture here, and you hit it with a hammer, it looks identical to the natural stone, because it is identical. So the idea was to take the concrete pavers and play with this double identity. And you see in the middle picture, the vertical sides are done with wooden, I can't think of the word, wooden, hello in English, slats. So you see it very well, it's formed concrete, and on the top it's slammed so that it looks identical to this natural stone. And on the right you see how I was pressing man-made materials into the concrete to express its man-madeness, and on the other side playing with this natural as well. And these paving stones, which you walk on, also become carriers of historical information. For example, fossils are put in there, giant dinosaurs, all the things were found in eastern Switzerland at the time, huge meter-long thigh bones and eyeballs and all kinds of things from these animals. And then there are the text. These are texts from the literature of the museum. So they're actually scientific words, and they're very, very funny words. I mean, very humorous almost, like supercontinent and ultra Helvetia, which means giant Switzerland or something. Very funny words which you trip across while you're walking through the park, and they just set off questions in your mind. So the park basically is there to become a catalyst of our imagination, to raise more questions than to answer, and not to become a learning park or a linear park, but just to have fragments of all these kind of historical things which one can fall into. Another sort of riddle put into the park is the entire park floor. Entire park is filled with the beautiful natural green sandstone from the eastern part of Switzerland. And this is all used for all of the cultural buildings, historical buildings. And you see a pedestal or an architectural detail there, and it's actually from the same stone and from the same stone quarry. So basically it's playing with this idea of throwing this natural stone in its natural form, and exactly next to it, the architectural version of it, what does mankind do with these materials? And it allows you to walk over the entire park without following paths, which sets you in a different state of engagement in the site. There's, I won't go into too much more detail, but I grew up in Chicago, actually, and I was always frustrated. My grandparents took us to the Museum of Natural History all the time, and I could never get these dates straight. I started 20 to 60 million years and billion years and trillion years. And I decided to pick the three most important eras of this geology of this area, and just to address them. And they're addressed in many places in the park, put together. The site used to be a tropics, used to have dolphins and sharks and dinosaurs and all kind of things. So on this paver and the water, it says tropical ocean in German. So it's playing with the history of this site. I won't go into detail, but these are stones that roll down from other sites in this period. The study of different fossils, from many, many fossils. We chose these and worked with an expert to choose which ones to put into the concrete. And to finish, a beautiful quote from Darwin, which is, "Nothing in life is more consistent than change." The next project is the Viscosistadt Park. This is a former sewage treatment plant, again, infrastructure. A very curious site. It's next to a river in Lucerne, the city of Lucerne, and a very large river, large for Switzerland, sorry, not so large. And in former times, one would place the uses along the river that weren't sensitive to flooding, and there'd be no damage. So there are many industrial sites along this river just outside the town. And those sites are now no longer needed for industry, and one of them has become a new school of the arts and used for studios and so on. And the outdoor space where the sewage treatment place is what we worked on. Here's a photo of the sewage treatment plant when it was still a sewage treatment plant, and the old train tracks which led to this site. And this is the new project. Basically, I'm just going to jump ahead so you can see a plan quickly. In the top, you see the School of the Arts, below the river, and then this giant sewage treatment basin right in the middle. And basically what we did was to say there are two linear elements, a new 2-meter high dam running along the river, so very, very high, and the train tracks, which you see running in front of the school. And they form this very long linear park, but they're a large height distance apart. So we made a very soft topography running from the school down to this 2-meter high wall, which protects one from the river. And then took the old basin, which is kind of like a ship stranded in the middle of this site, and raised it by 2 meters, but kept its form and filled it with gravel, so that without making a big fuss about anything, it simply becomes an arena for the students to sit around and to have events, and to be, because of the new height, to look out at the river and to sense the history of the site. There you see it opening, the old basin opening to the river. It's allowed to flood, and the 2-meter high wall where the floods happen. This next project is in construction. It's almost finished. We're quite proud of it. It's maybe one of the most important projects we've done. And it was an international competition for the new airport park in Zurich. It's a subtitle, again, if we want to talk about infrastructure in the sense of providing for society, it's natural preservation meets shopping mall. And this is a photo of this site as it is today. And yes, we'll still be after the site. It's one of the more complex sites we've had, and it's full of contradictions. You can see the history of the site changing over time. In the upper left-hand corner, this hill that we were just looking at is actually a former glacier moraine. It's a glacier hill. And here it is before the Zurich airport was built. In the 50s, they built an airport for Zurich on this site, which you see to the left. And then this glacier hill thrusting itself into the middle, and a very well-known landscape architect in the 50s decided this would kind of be the garden in front of the airport. As time went on, it was needed to connect the airport with a highway. And so this highway was built, you see it there in the 70s, the highway was built leading to the airport. And on top of what this highway did actually was cut the Glacier Hill in two parts. So to the right of the highway, on the right side of the picture with this squiggly walking paths, you see a hill. And in the middle, which is our park, you see a kind of a fragment left over of the hill. And that's already was a natural hill. So we're talking about, again, about natural artificial relationships. So it's a glacier moraine, but the excavation from the highway, they plopped on top of this hill. So you have a natural layer, and then you have this artificial excavation layer. Then they had to compensate for the loss of nature where they cut through the highway, through. So they planted wetlands, woods, and fields on this little fragment hill and set it under natural preservation. So now we have, like a wedding cake, kind of the natural glacier moraine, the excavation from the highway, the artificially planted nature, and it's put under natural preservation. And everyone thinks, and this is what even our experts have told us, the Swiss person goes up there and thinks, this is Mother Nature pure. This is untouched nature. So we are working with this. This is a kind of a creepy investor visualization of the site, but you can understand. On the right, you see the airport. And very important, what you see between our park and the airport is a huge new city, piece of a city from the Japanese architect Rinken Yamamoto. And this is just being finished, the construction. And he took the topic of the old historic city of Zurich and made a very dense center and made this crazy thing called the circle. The building's called the circle, and the highway leading to the airport goes around it. And we are the park next to it. This is the image I showed earlier. This is one of our favorite images of the site, where you see this artificially planted nature, which is very beautiful at times, and staring out at the parking garage to the airport with this advertising, which has changed every few weeks. So this completely strange juxtaposition of imagery just crashed into one place. And the site has this absolutely strange double perception. To the left, on the very left, is a well-known historic Swiss painting of the landscape. And next to it, to the right of it, is a photo of this very strange site. And they look almost identical, in fact. And then to the right of that, another well-known Swiss painting of a forest edge. And to the right of that, a photo of the site again, looking quite similar. So it has this very painterly beauty at times, but most of the time it looks sort of like this, which is pretty banal and pretty sterile. So how does one make a park out of this? And in talking about limitations and conditions, when we got the competition brief, we weren't allowed to put in even 1 meter more paths than already exist. And we weren't allowed to really touch the woods, and we weren't allowed to touch the fields that are ecologically important, but we had to make a park. But we weren't allowed to say it was a park because the ecologists would be very upset. So the task was to try to bend the laws, to try to experiment and make a pilot project for how to use the Swiss laws, which are very, very restraining about woods and about ecological preservation. They're in naturally preserved territories. How can you make a park out of that? What you see on the left is the, until construction, existing zoning for the ecologically protected sites. And I just have to add that these woods are under strict protection as woods, but no one uses them. They're not beautiful. They're not worth anything to anybody, but they were put under protection, so you can't touch them. So we took these zones, which you see on the left, and on the right, you see the scheme of our new design. And we made a kind of a negotiation and said, look, we'll keep that part if you'll let us add that, and you can keep that if you'll let us add that, and so on and so forth. And what you see particularly, for example, just one law, and then I'll go on to the design, we were able to open up some of the woods, but there's a particular law called open woods, and it has many, many limitations. So we had to invent a new word to make a new category, which didn't have limitations. So we were able to change some of the woods to have more qualities. So now I'll go into the design. This is the competition plan, actually, we handed in. And the design consists of two main gestures. The first one is a 200-meter large circle of trees, of red trees, beech trees, which addresses the scale of the landscape. It's just talking about the power of this incredibly huge landscape fragment. On the left, you see this new building called the Circle, and farther to the left, the airport. And the second thing we did was to talk about this layering that I told before, which is the glacier moraine, which is kind of this archaic Swiss glacier. On top of that, a Swiss woods. On top of that, an abstract landscape sculpture of this excavation out of the highway, which has been thrown on top of the Glacier Hill. And on top of that, the sky. And our design consists of moving up through these 4 layers and experiencing this clearing at the top. Here's a visualization from the competition of moving through the glacier moraine. Then you'll see what the investors made us do, so it's not as quite exciting as we would have liked. So moving through the woods, this is also collage, how we could use these woodlands, but they're not that old yet, they're not that beautiful. And we took an expert from Sweden who did the first woodland laboratory, and he helped us to understand how we can maintain these woods so that they unfold in a much more beautiful way. On the left, you see how the woods is looking today. It's just not attractive. You can't move through it. You don't see anything. The vegetation has no form at all. And on the right, you see how one could trim the vegetation and manipulate it to create a more strong spatial atmosphere. So we worked with a team of 5 woodland experts. Here you see an image of the site before construction with this crazy topography. If a landscape architect had done this excavation, formed the excavation, it never would be this strange and it never would be this exciting. And you see the woods. Sorry, I'm just going to go back so you don't get lost. Coming up through the 4 layers, the 4 vertical layers, this is the glacier moraine, and going up to the woods, then coming out to this strange topography, which is kind of blobby and unformed. And on the very top, we decided to make a sky platform, and using steam, which makes the invisible sky that connects all of us on the planet, makes it palpable. It means you can feel the sky as a spatial creature by putting a film of water. Again, our investor visualization for that same phenomenon. And the idea was to use concrete in its raw form. So it looks like this nagelfluh, like this raw concrete, natural concrete at the bottom. And it becomes more and more abstract, and it's polished terrazzo when you get to the sky. And we had hoped to make a skating rink at the top. We ended up putting just some small interventions in. We were not allowed to do a lot. This is a pavilion that will go into construction. And basically, it's kind of like a Japanese tea pavilion, but it crawls up the hill to the sky platform at the same time and becomes a stage and a setting for events and so on and so forth. This is the last. I'm going to end this project with a few construction site photos. Here we are looking, this just taken a few days ago, looking at this big building from the Japanese architect, and you just see our park behind it in these little slits between this building. We have to connect the bottom with the top for handicapped people, and we've put in a funicular, a very short one. It takes 1 minute, I think, to go up. That's just under construction now. Our very strongly attacked concrete walls had to become quite proper because the investors, which is the airport, they wanted to have everything look very fancy and kind of chic. So we weren't allowed to do everything we would have liked. Here you see one of the red trees, one of the beeches in the big circle that we've planted. The sky platform, this is the construction underground where we'll have steam coming up and the water film coming, etc. In the back, you can see the Alps when you're up there, and you at the top of the building, actually, here, you're at the highest point. And we're just working on having this theme of the ground glacier moraine. So at the bottom, quite raw, and it becomes finer and finer, and at the top, it becomes polished. Okay, I think I'm fine in the time. If we were together, we could take a break, but I guess we can't, so I'll continue. This next project is quite a charming project we were asked by the government to do about tranquility and silence in the cities. And we were asked to choose any site we wanted and to study tranquility and silence and to try to understand how they work. And in fact, they didn't ask us to do the urban sites. For the urban sites, they even just took quite, let's say, normal people studying plazas and so on. They asked us to do something outside of the city. And in Zurich, we have a mountain. You see the word here over, above Uetliberg. It's our house mountain, that one says in German. If you look out the window from anywhere in Zurich, you're looking at this small mountain. So we decided that's a fascinating site to take because it stands for the landscape, but it's in the middle of the city, and people go there to have tranquility. So this is a lovely quote. Silence, I discover, is something that you can actually hear. That could just as well be from John Cage, in fact. He's very interested in sound and silence as sound and all the things one hears when one is trying to hear silence. It's all in German, and I will just tell you the basic ideas. I've heard that one of the logics behind doing this lecture series is also about discussing with the politicians and with the communities about what are their potentials to use landscape as a means for working with urban structure, with a quality of life in the cities and so on. So I thought it's interesting to show the process of this study, the questions we asked and where we were able to get to. This question, the big question in the middle is, what role does landscape play in tranquility? The word in German is Ruhe, and Ruhe in German means many, many things. In English, we have a few more words. It means tranquility, but also silence, also calm. It means all those kind of things. So 3 teams were asked to do this study, and we were the only landscape architects, and it seemed an appropriate question to ask, what role does landscape play in tranquility of place? Is landscape automatically tranquil? Or do we just think it is? If we look at a landscape, do we already think it's tranquil, even if there's lots of noise there? And the conclusion out of thinking around about this topic was that actually tranquility is a kind of a collage, and it has 3 main factors that make it happen. One is the place. One are the sounds you hear in that place. And the third is the human being who's perceiving it. And in any given moment in a place, these 3 factors are going to combine in a unique way. And so the goals of our project, Ziele means goals, we wanted to understand how these 3 factors interact in order to create different experiences of tranquility in the cities. And this is a topic, in fact, the man who asked us to do this project, he's half Swiss, half Norwegian. He just did a master's in Norway and brought this topic back and is really pushing it here in Switzerland now. It's a topic that's becoming more and more relevant to our urban planning and our urban design issues, because more and more as people, we need to search for quietness because the cities are growing, the noise is growing, we're always tuned into an iPhone or whatever. And so this issue of calming down, of calming at all, of tranquility is becoming a new issue. So this says the 3 factors in this collage: place, which aspects of place contribute to the experience of calm, which aspects of sound contribute to the experience of calm. And this was also charming. Silence is the absence of, I looked up this word Ruhe in German, calm, silence, tranquility. And it was only defined in about 10 different places with what it's not. It was never said what it is, but only what it's not. It's not having disturbing sounds, and it's not having excitement, and it's not having disturbance, and it's not having this and this. And okay, but what is it? So we asked many questions about this tranquility. How long is it? How long can it take? Does it have to be continual? How long can a noise be, or a disturbing noise, before it breaks the tranquility? How loud can silence be, or tranquility? How quiet can it be? And also came to the conclusion that in Switzerland, at least, silence and calm are very, very, very important values. So that there's been whole campaigns about not talking loud, don't talk loud in the tram, and don't talk loud in the streets, and nothing should be loud because people need their calm here. It's very important. And I can't put the film on right now, but the picture you see on the left is actually sunset on the Lake of Zurich, where everyone goes to take a walk and to feel calm. And there's a group of people from Latin America with boom boxes playing salsa music. And they were enjoying, they're staring at the mountain I've been telling you about. This is where we did the study, the hill across from the lake. It's kind of a small mountain. So they're staring at our small mountain and feeling tranquility while listening to boom boxes and having a party. And that's kind of the complexity about tranquility. How does that work between place, people, and sound? So quickly to mention this place, this is a view from our office to this mountain. And referring to this, one of the three aspects of place, what happens is a green mountain per se becomes an icon of tranquility. You stare at this hill, it's on the right, you see this hill in Zurich, right in the middle of the city. And immediately just looking at the hill, you already feel more tranquil. And sorry, I'm having a silly bar menu in the middle of my picture, so I can't read my own title. So this mountain becomes an image for this tranquility in many ways. Seeing the mountain from afar, seeing the mountain from close, and going into the mountain and walking on the trails. So I actually led this project in the office, and what I decided to do is a kind of field research, a very fake and humorous kind of field research, but serious at the same time. And this means field research. And I sat down and thought, how would one research this very complex topic? And I decided, well, let's see. I stare out my window at this Uetliberg. And here you see in English 4 points. Here's Uetliberg in the middle, that little blob there. And the first point about tranquility of a kind of a mountain or green situation in a city would be thinking of going there. Maybe we'd all feel more tranquil just by thinking about going there. You say, I'm going to go walk in this mountain with trees and woods and the view to the lake. And then I already feel more tranquil. Point 2, you see above it, going there. Knowing that I'm going to go there, knowing I'm getting in the tram or on my bicycle and going there is already part of the experience of feeling tranquil. Point 3, going up the mountain, and point 4, going down the mountain and going home, going away. And what do I remember about the place when I've left? So based on this just kind of reflection about how one might experience the experience of this mountain, I made a walker's kit. Yes, so Spaziergang is a walk. And I made a little kit and asked 10 employees of the office to do this research, personal research. Everyone had a kit, and there were many questions, and there was a proposal for the graphic, and everyone had to study this experience of thinking about going there, coming home. And what ended up being, you see at the top, stations. They all had 10 stations they had to stop. One was thinking about going there, then getting there, being there, doing 5 places on the mountain, going home, and then when you're home, thinking about the experience, the memory of the experience. So they all had 10 stations, and they all had to study the place, the sounds they heard, and their own personal perception of these sounds. Here are the 10 walks. And it's quite charming. Each person did this graphic, which I just kind of invented, basically show your walk on the mountain, show your 10 stations, what you experienced, take your most important photos about how you experienced it, and then answer the following questions. And I'll just go through the words that are written in bold text. What does tranquility mean for you? What allows it to be reached? How do you reach it? What's the role of the landscape in this tranquility experience? What's the role of the collage, place, sound, and human being? And what disturbs this tranquility? So here's Julia D, and here's her plan, studying it. And for her, the fog was quite a central aspect. Here's Helen Y and her plans. An autumn day, sunny, completely different experience of tranquility. Stephanie T, another experience. And you see always the 10 stations. Another one. And I'll just go into a couple of the points. For example, the one person who went in the fog said, you keep getting lost in the fog. And when you get into fog, you become absorbed in your own personal bubble. So you move between perceiving the landscape and then going into a more internal state, and again, perceiving the landscape, and again, going into a more internal state. So your awareness of sound keeps changing. Sometimes you're aware of sounds and sometimes you've completely forgotten. This person went at sunset, and she said she was completely involved in the place and the sounds until it became dark. And then she got scared. And all of a sudden, the only thing she was worried about was to find her way out of the darkness and off the mountain. So our personal state and our personal experience of landscape affects how we experience this. And so these were these 10 experiences. And in the end, it was quite interesting to compare them. Here are the 10 stations. Here are all the different factors. And we were actually able to draw quite a lot of conclusions out of this. Here are the conclusions about place, Ort. Landscape becomes a backdrop to the silence. Landscape can produce lovely sounds, which we like, the rustle of leaves and so on. It can distract you, etc. So there's the sound. We went through a whole lot of aspects of that, which sounds disturb, which sounds don't disturb. There was actually a place where you're allowed to shoot, a shooting range, about 10 days a year. And that was happening on the day that I went. So there was shooting nonstop. Also happens in urban context, the people, the different aspects. And in the end, we proposed 5 planning tools, which we believe would help the city to be able to allow people to experience tranquility on the mountain. And I think I would love to tell you about them, but it's much too complex. I would have to talk for too long to tell you about them. But landscape turned out to be a very, very essential aspect of this tranquility. And to end this project, silence is the thing that everyone knows intimately until you ask them to tell about it. We are almost through with the lecture. This is one more complex project. It's as complex as the airport project. And then there's just one last project. This is about military base as infrastructure. And the subtitle is A Traumatized Landscape in Your Neighborhood. It's also one of the more prestigious or important projects that we have in our office. It was an 2-phase invited competition, international. It's in Heidelberg, Germany, and will go into construction next month. This, what you're looking at, is a Nazi military base built in the 1930s on the edge of the well-known university city of Heidelberg in Germany. And these buildings, most of this is still present, and you'll see it in our design. After the Nazis left, the US military came in and stayed for many years and formed the site in its own way. And after the US military left, the European headquarters for the NATO came to the same site and formed it as well. So today you have these layers again of different cultural institutions. And the competition it's called the Other Park, which doesn't translate too well from German. But the task was to do all these in-between spaces, the old parade grounds, the old riding grounds for the horses, the in-between spaces between the buildings, the old Nazi elite had a special fancy park where they could dine and where they had a beautiful place to be, et cetera, et cetera. So our job was to make all the in-between spaces. And for the first time, the fence is being torn down from this site since the 1930s. And the task was to to integrate this place into the society. Here you see the city of Heidelberg in the north, the top of the map, and the red circle where this site is. This is the entrance, the official entrance to the site. You see the well-known, Nazi sculptures. I mean, they took very good care to make beautiful buildings. This is the local sandstone, very red sandstone. And you're looking through to the parade grounds. So one of our employees, we're digging here through the rubble looking for artifacts. We were from 27 teams, in fact, the only one that seemed to be really fascinated by the history of the site. Probably for some reason such as I'm American and there were American barracks, and I'm also Jewish, and it was a place where it's related to the Holocaust. So maybe my personal connection to the history of the site made me very, very interested in interpreting the site in a new way, but letting the history be read and understood, and doing it with a sense of humor. And I think, I just have to say, I think only a Jewish person can have humor about something like the Holocaust, because it's in our tradition to find humor in everything. So it's quite linked to the mentality of the culture to actually find a humorous way of playing with the history of the Nazis. This is a site of this elite Nazi park, Commissar Park, and you can see how the plants have become overgrown, and you see the big tower there for the communication tower. Again, I'm just giving you a few impressions of the site before I go into the design. Fences everywhere. And surveillance cameras everywhere. So this is the basis of our design, and you see the site in the colored parts. I wish I had a pointer, but I don't. What we decided to do was to make a kind of a band. We called it the band in the German, the red band that surrounds and unites all these spaces. And the site we had to work with is not the turquoise part. We had to make proposals, but the turquoise, light turquoise color you see are all private, bought from investors to remake. But the colored park at the top, the green park to the right of the main street, the link between the park and this parade ground and this riding plaza for the horses you see on the left, and this entrance, which you just saw a photo of on the right, that's the main entrance to the bar. These were all of our sites. And it was very hard to find a uniting principle. This is the competition design plan. And I'll just quickly get you on board what the places are. It's fairly a complex design, and then I'll talk about the interpretation of history, military bases, infrastructure, and what we've done to interpret the site and make it accessible to people. I'll start with the entrance. Maybe it's an easier way to enter the site. On the lower right, this is officially called the Torhaus Plaza. But we renamed each of these sites, and I'll just tell you the 5 main names that we gave them, because they're very important to how we understood the reusing of these sites. And our intention was to make it a site of, what's the word, Begegnung, encounter. So rather than making it a place behind a fence that was used for control, for military purposes, for power, we would transform all of these streetscapes and all of these spaces into a place of encounter for the people. The site on the lower right, we renamed the Vitrine, and a Vitrine is in Italian. It's the looking, what do you call it, a glass case in front of the shops or in a shop window, because it allows you to view into the entire site, which was hidden behind the building. And we're doing a very funny interpretation of that site there. The plaza you see behind the main building on the bottom in the center used to be parade grounds. We decided that we had to keep the sense of emptiness for the historical importance. So you see the big paving, it's 100 meters in diameter. But we would put some trees and grass around it, first of all, to reinterpret it, to give it a new feeling, and second, so that people could spend time there, because it's at the moment about 150 meters diameter and without a single tree, and you cannot use that in the future. So by renaming it Forum, it's a place for people to encounter, to give talks, speeches, events, and so on. The site to the left, bottom left, at the moment is the riding plaza for the horses with the stables around it. And we renamed it the Cultural Market. There's a lot of new high-tech creative industries there. And we said that's a place with exotic trees that will become a cultural exchange market. Going from the Forum or the Parade Platz to the north, we have something called the Lounge. It's where the students, so some of this will be a university, and that's student housing, and where they all come out, and I'll show you in a moment what we're doing with these spaces. And to the north, the the park. And yeah, I won't continue. So basically, those are the main sites. I won't go into detail. This is a visualization from the competition. It's very faked, so you can see it. The plaza does not look as big as it is when you're there. These 100-meter diameter is huge. And you see how people can gather. This is a visualization from the competition of the park, where it was very important to leave the park the way it was, leave it with the old trees, the falling trees, the historical touch, but we just put interventions in. So we actually, you see these stone plazas, which we've now done by reusing existing pavings, where people can sit in new places in this park without disturbing the historic use. This is the cultural market, we call it, where the horses used to be in the stables, which becomes a kind of an informal place for exchange, showing films, advertising, all the things the cultural industry is doing. And this is the main part of the design. What you see in the title is the Park de Begegnung, means the Park of Encounters. And the three titles below it, there's a social encounter, which we did by gathering many user groups and giving them many places to encounter each other. In the center, which is the core, which I'm going to talk about now, is historical encounter. And then the third one is contextual encounter, how the park relates to its surroundings. And I'm just going to focus now on this historical encounter because it's the main part of the design, and I'll show you the examples. The basic theory was, you see a kind of a matrix here, and the left column, the series of pictures, are a series of elements, and I'll explain how we reinterpreted them or gave them a new meaning. I can't think of the word in English, but we reinterpreted these elements. For example, you see at the second from the top, the oak tree. And the oak tree is an international symbol, archaic symbol for strength. And there's one oak tree on the site that's even from before the Nazi time. But the Nazis took over this innocent, beautiful tree and made it a symbol of Nazi strength. So they planted oak trees all over the site. So we said, okay, we're going to make the oak tree the main plant of the entire site. We're going to plant a whole bunch more, and we're going to give the oak tree back to the German people. Below that, you see the eagle, also an archaic and timeless symbol of strength. A beautiful bird. The Nazis took this innocent bird and made it their symbol, and they have giant stone eagles on the site. So we said, okay, we're going to take this plaza, which I told the vitrine, where these giant stone eagles are, and we're going to put these eagles on the ground, and we're going to collect all the surveillance cameras from the site and stuff them in this plaza and put birds' nests in them. So you're going to have birds flying around and singing happily and feeling free and showing their great freedom and rather laughing at the stone eagles. And it just goes on like this. You see then the giant stone walls around the site, and we've turned them into pergolas and sitting places for people to sit and meet. We took the control cabins and turned them into projection rooms for what's happening on the site all the time, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll flip through these means, and I'll flip through what we did with them. Here you see the stone eagle. Here you see the 100-year-old oak tree, the last remaining, the only witness of the site before the Nazi time. The checkpoint, this is called. We've turned it into a playground. This is where all the cars and trucks had to pass through these about 12 different control cabins, which were controlling if they can enter or not. Surveillance cameras, paving, which we've reground. I'll show you in a moment what we've done with these different elements. Paving, old furniture, lamps, paving again. Another image, camera, the walls with the fences, which we've turned into seating walls to unite the neighborhood with the main street. More paving. And again, just so you can get the plan, so you can kind of get oriented. There's basically in the north, the park, in the center, this forum, to the left, the cultural market, and again, to the right, this entrance plaza. So here's a visualization of the entrance plaza, the vitrine, and the collection of surveillance cameras where the birds are collected and come and sing around. And we're actually working on this project now. It's gone on and continued, and it's become a bit more complex. Here you see a model of the current state of the design. And I just decided to add a new layer to it, and that is that coming out of these cameras, we can't use them as cameras anymore. There'll be loudspeakers, and there'll be kind of whispers of the history of the site. And so I'm about to go and do a lot of interviews with and collect archive material of the Boy Scouts in German or in French and in English, all the people who've used the site before, of the sewing clubs, of the soldiers. And when you walk by, certain sounds in a very kind of strange atmospheric way will just start speaking to you, and it will almost be like the ghost of the site there. Maybe a soldier will scream at you in German and say, hey, stop, what are you doing here? A spotlight will follow you. Maybe someone will start singing some chanson music from the 40s. So you'll just move through all the periods of history as you're moving through the site, and then moving past the birds' nests, which have an ecological value as well. This is lying down at the bottom of the plan. I actually have to turn this plan around. This is the checkpoint you saw on the left. At bottom left, you see the control cabins. And so we just took this language of these radii of the trucks and cars and continued into this huge playground. So it's again transforming the meaning. It's always taking the meaning of control and power and turning it into contemporary use of encounter. So what you see are an entire series of play landscapes that just take the radius of cars as a language and spin it off into this giant play landscape. Working on the model for all these spaces, different kinds of playing landscapes. This is the lounge. It's that small space connecting the park in the north to the parade grounds or forum in the south. And here we're collecting all these strange lamps left over from the Americans and the strange furniture you saw and making it into a lounge for students. Here to one of the spaces to the right, turning the wall into a seating wall, which connects then the view to the main road driving through the site to the park on the right. That's the same site, that's the main street, and this park area to the right, which we call the common ground. And it's where people can appropriate the site and use it in the way they want. And one of the last things, we've ground up the existing paving. We ground up all those funny stones I was showing you in the photos, and are pouring them into a new concrete, which will be this red band which surrounds the site. And for budgetary reasons, it can only be 80 centimeters wide, but we are actually the normal colored concrete you see, the stones, we are surrounding all the spaces like a frame for this band, which we call it's the band of encounter. And as a completely new layer, we designed this furniture, which we call confetti, and it just breaks through the entire seriousness of the site. And these kind of seating elements, which have rubber seating, are in this band of encounter and surround all the different sites and become landscapes where people can meet. And I'll finish now with one of the more exotic projects, competitions we were able to win. Yes, we won it, and it won't happen. We're very, very, very sad. Every 25 years, Switzerland has made an expo, a national expo for the last 75 years. And each expo has a topic related to that era. The first one was about industrial innovation, which was very common in the 1880s and so on. The next one, I can't actually remember, was about defense. The last one was about culture and landscape, the arts. And this one was, we were asked to make living environment for people. And it was an international open competition with 80 teams in 2 rounds. And we most remarkably were able to win. We did this together with an architecture office and a writer. And it should have been realized in 2027, which is why it's called Expo 27. And the subtitle is Public Participation at the Territorial Scale. The site which was offered to the teams was the entire eastern part of Switzerland, or northeastern part of Switzerland. What you're looking at is a map of 3 states, or canton we say in Switzerland, a very large territory for Switzerland. And you see going from the Lake of Constance, it's called, to the north you see the country of Germany, and to the right you see the country of Austria. So this is the entire northeastern sector of Switzerland. And we were allowed to do anything on that site. And we were the only team that actually used the landscape as the content of the expo and used the entire 3 states as our site. Rather than choosing a site, we said, okay, we'll just confiscate the entire landscape and make an expo. We decided, well, we discussed how do you make landscape legible? How do you make landscape into an experience? And decided that one way would be a kind of a naming, and then looked for characteristics. So what you see on the plan is on the darkish blue at the top, the lake landscape, which connects Switzerland to other countries. In the center, a very nice word in German, Stadtlandschaft. It means urban landscape. It's the urbanized landscape surrounding the city of, leading from Zurich to St. Gallen, which is a main city in the east where the Museum of Natural History is. And you have all the industry and the commercial zones and the kind of this sprawl landscape there. And then to the bottom in the turquoise, the mountain landscape. And we gave each of these 3 bands an entire series of characteristics, which made it not only legible, but experienceable. At the bottom, you see a section going from the lake to the high mountains. And each of these bands got a main question. Starting to the left in the mountain landscape, where do we come from? It's about the archaic, the villages, the history, the geology of the site, the power of nature, etc. In the urban sprawl landscape, who are we today? It's about technology, dynamic economic situations, transportation, etc., etc. And at the lake landscape, where are we going? And this is related to the 3 countries that meet, to the longing for abroad, the wider view of things, etc. Each of these bands got an entire series of characteristics. And in each band, we chose one main site to work with. And we transposed these characteristics on that site. So the lake, excuse me, I started before at the mountains, which is at the bottom here, so I'll go to the bottom. The mountains stand for nature, for the villages. Each band got a contemporary planning problem. In the mountains, that's the problem that everyone's moving away from the villages to the cities, so the villages are dying out. And each band received a main resource. In this one, it would be the mountain as a recreational site. And each band received a timeless human intervention that has always been in this band and will always be in this band. So on the mountain, this became the dance floor, because this is not timeless, but for hundreds of years, Switzerland has had a tradition of putting a platform in the villages, and then all the villages around come and do dances on that platform. And it's a way of exchanging between the mountain villages. So the planning problem in the mountains was these shrinking villages or emptying villages, and we decided to use the dance floor as a means to initiate tourism and reinitiate encounter in these mountain villages. In the urban sprawl landscape called the crossing, the main element is the street, the road, as you know, from all these industrial and commercial sites. And we chose really an ugly, really banal commercial, semi-commercial urban periphery situation. And we took the street as the main element. And on the street, proposed 1 kilometer long dining tables and all kinds of means of communicating with the people that they all meet and so on. And because the main problem is your tons and tons and tons of roads are killing this landscape. And at the lake, the main resource is water, of course, and the issue of water in the future. And the main built element is the pier. And what we were trying, and then we used the pier, you see on the right, a sketch where we made many kinds of piers and all collected all kinds of boats, from rowboats to whatever, and made exhibition spaces. And what we basically were doing then on this competition, the proposal was that landscape is a huge topic in Switzerland because it's all being built up. So every day it's in the paper. How much sprawl, where can you build, where can't you build, how many roads, less roads, more roads, what can you build, high can you build, etc. But none of these people talk to each other. And you have many, many vested interests. And I'd like to close the lecture. I'll show this as just a few more slides. But the idea of these stakeholders who all demand something from the landscape, and all of them have a voice in the landscape, except one, and that's the landscape itself. And so you have the traffic planners, the ecologists, the investors, the politicians, you have the artists, you have the farmers, a huge lobby, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all determining the face of the landscape, but they're all not talking to each other. So this idea of public participation at the territorial scale is that in all these existing structures, silos and on boats and ships and underground bunkers and farmhouses and everywhere in this huge landscape, there would be for 3 months an entire series of events, discussions, and landscape becomes both the main content of the expo, the backdrop of the expo, and an issue of contention where people start to negotiate about the future of the landscape. Each person visiting this expo from Switzerland, all parts of Switzerland, as well as abroad, would put in their interests, what interests they have in the issues of landscape. And they would then receive a personalized map, excursion map, which would show them where they could go to experience their interests and show them which trains they could take to get to their interests. And it just so happened that 300 trains were being taken out of service because they were too old just at the time of the expo, so that we proposed to turn all of these train cars into exhibition spaces themselves. And they would be reading the landscape as you move through it. There'd be interactive, digital, kind of a free flow of information of all visitors. And you'd have your treasure map, so to speak, in your hands, your personalized treasure map, and then you'd be riding on the train and maybe you'd hear an announcement, you're now moving from the Catholic to the Protestant part of Switzerland. So you'd be overlaid with mythological tellings, storytelling, facts, all kinds of things, and you're experiencing this landscape and having it read to you in real time. And with that, I'd like to close the lecture, and I hope it's been able to show something about our daily infrastructure, how Studio Vulkan is confronting these daily landscapes, and how we look for a language between pragmatism and poetics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was amazing. I really like your focus on details. You have amazing projects. It was really, really interesting. Just a short message for our audience. You had a chance to send your questions on slido.com. You are watching a lecture of Robin from Studio Vulkan, and we are talking about landscape architecture. So, Professor, I have some questions for you. The first question is that I mentioned on the beginning that you are teaching on Graduate School of Architecture on Harvard. Do you traveling between Switzerland and United States, or do you have some problems with the coronavirus now? Is the situation complicated for you?
They have a beautiful course they call Option Studios. Just to quickly explain the school there, because it's quite interesting, but it's only a graduate school of design, and it's architecture, urban design, urban planning, and landscape, all for professionals. And they have a beautiful course called Option Studios, where 20 professionals from offices around the world are asked to come each semester and offer any topic they like. And the students can sign up interdisciplinary. So you get students from all different professions to come in this. And I was asked to give one of these last autumn, and I was asked to come back again next autumn. So if I'm lucky, I've just escaped the coronavirus, because otherwise it would in fact be impossible.
Great, awesome, thank you. I have the question for you. I choose the first one. It's really interesting. In some way, infrastructure becomes landscape itself. What do you think about this term? And I would like to ask you from another point of view that in these days, nature becomes infrastructure, because we have to plan it, we have to put it in the middle of the cities and let it work. So how do you think about this?
A very nice question. I have to say, the same thought occurred to me just today when I was just preparing the lecture. I thought, is that where we've gotten to? That nature, in fact, is a resource. And when you look up the definition of infrastructure, they talk about its resources that service society, yes, and the built environment. And I think, as this image maybe properly shows, landscape has become almost only a resource, and in that sense, one of our infrastructural elements, just like a road and anything else. And once one would begin to ponder that in more depth, it leads to probably to very, very fascinating discussions.
Yeah, great. Another question, why there is a need to change, intervene, or complement nature, which itself is already complete, complex, and perfect?
Yes, very good question. Well, let's say, where we live, anyone probably listening to this lecture tonight is living in an urban setting of some kind, urban or peripheral. So we are surrounded by a built environment, and we're surrounded by all the complexity and all the issues of the built environment, including noise and pollution. And the built materials don't, until now at least, change. They always stay the same. So paving stays paving, 12 months a year and 10 years long and 20 years long. Building facades stay the same every day, et cetera, et cetera. And what nature in every form, from a weed in the sidewalk to a roof garden to a shrub to whatever, a lake, all of these, to natural light even as nature, all of these are able to change minute for minute, day for day, and year for year, season for season. And this gives the human being such an amazing, it fulfills a very, very deep archaic need in us. There's a well-known American writer named Gary Snyder, and he is one of the top people, I'd say, in the discussion of a deep ecology. I guess you've heard the term now because everyone's saying deep something. And deep ecology is, I think, one of the first terms that use that word, and it's about 20, 30 years old. And he calls it the green man in us. And he says that we need the green man in us, and we need everything nature has to offer. And nature is, I'm just quoting him loosely, it's not just eating berries in the sunshine, it's the decaying feathers and bones of dead animals and all that other kind of stuff. Actually, we have whole lectures on this, you know, decay and all kind of things too. And so I think nature will always offer that sense of not being controlled by us. And that is so important for the human to experience. And in that sense, this balance is really, really important.
Yeah. I'm interested in the project of the Japanese architects, you know, with the near airport you showed us. Because in Prague, we have a highway in the middle of the city. Around the National Museum. It's a big problem and a big topic in Prague. And we redeveloped that space, we redesigned it, and we built a new park there, and people use it. Surprisingly, they sit on the grass in the middle of the highway, between the two highways. Do you think people, do people use the park there? You said it's not a park, but do they use the space, or will they?
I probably didn't explain it quite right. It is, in fact, becoming a park. We could only work at the level of interventions and transforming these natural spaces or trading them. But it is going to become a park in September. And when this circle is in full use, it has 2 hotels, conference center. It's huge, 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 huge. It's basically the size of an entire city neighborhood, 8 floors high. And it will have 20,000 people a day. That's excluding the entire airport users and employees. So it's actually going to be way too many users that the space can't even carry as many users as it's going to have. And still, it has this natural appearance. So it's a very strange reality up there. And we believe there'll be many, many, many people sitting on all the walls. They're fields that they're not even allowed to walk on until the seeds come out and multiply every year. It's a very weird mix between natural preservation and incredibly intense uses. We've made up all kind of funny things like calling them yoga mats, putting different platforms. I mean, what are all the things people want to do at their lunchtime, after work, and this pavilion. The intention is that if you're just 2 people, you're sitting in this beautiful kind of tea pavilion, but if you're 50 people, it still works. And how can you make places for entire, let's say, transformation between gathering and tranquility? So the site, or like some of the hills where they're allowed to walk, using them almost like a kind of a amphitheater for concerts and so on and so forth. So the idea is you see very little, but each one of those elements can do about 50 things or 100 things, so that it can take in a lot of uses and a lot of people. But when they go away, you don't see anything anymore. And that's kind of the principle with which we've tried to operate in that place.
Another question is, I think, very actual about the situation in Prague. It's about the profession of landscape architect. What do you think about the current position of landscape architect in society? I mean, your position between other professions, architects, engineers, and other. What do you think about it? What's the position of landscape architects?
Question back to you, from the perspective of whom and in which context?
For example, architects at all, because in Czech Republic now we are dealing with the situation that it was not normal to work with landscape architects when you are redesigning, for example, a square or
Right.
just a street. But now it becomes a topic, now it becomes a thing, and we realizing that it's really normal and we need to cooperate with landscape architects if we want a livable city. So this is the way how the question is asked, I hope.
Yes. I come from the United States originally. In the United States, landscape art, it's a younger country, of course, than European countries, and landscape architects have much more standing and have much more of an independent profession. In Switzerland, we traditionally have been completely almost dependent on architects, and it's just breaking out of that now. Germany, I think, is more independent profession. France, for sure. Holland, for sure. So each country has its own kind of profile and history. But there are countries where architecture has traditionally played a very strong role and landscape is just coming to birth, let's say. And what I do, I have to say I've flirted, so to speak, with all the professions. I began in architecture. I decided I needed more freedom of expression. I entered art 3 times. I studied in an Academy of Art in Germany. And my first profession is actually urban design. So I actually, when I work, I'm working in, I can't, that's why I did it on purpose, to be able to look from all the different perspectives. And I do believe the different professions have something to offer. When you make a city plaza, for example, architects have a stringency and a clarity, use of materials, maybe detailing, that we as landscape architects haven't focused as much on. But at the same time, landscape architects, depending on their background, and just to say we have such diverse backgrounds that there isn't a landscape architect, it's easier to say an architect and know that they're going to have a very similar studies, even if the language is a bit different. But for us, you cannot say who does what. But for example, my personal background through urban design is very much related to human life and how humans act and interact and behave in public space and design in public space. And so I think this is needed for, which skills does each of us bring as a landscape architect to a given project? Is our focus more ecology, more social behavior, design with materials, atmosphere? What are we looking to do? And the more of these aspects each of us can combine in ourselves, the more we can be able to confront public space, because public space needs all of those voices in it. So I think I am super, super pro landscape architecture. I think it's the most amazing profession in the world. In fact, I'm a complete fan of this profession. And I think we are capable to have the lead in many places where the architect, for example, often doesn't look at human behavior, doesn't look at the site. They think if I make a beautiful paving and put in 12 linden trees or lime trees, it must be a good plaza. And maybe it's a horrible plaza, maybe it's a complete failure, but they're admiring maybe the paving pattern and the bench. And I think that's a complete misplacement and misunderstanding of public space. So I think on the other side, a landscape architect might make a very banal, not a very well designed space, but it may work quite well. So I think it's important to understand all these different voices, all these different skills and aspects we need, and to learn as much about as many of them as possible, because we actually need all of those skills, from urban planning to urban design to landscape to architecture. And the lines become blurred, in fact. In the end, if we just think holistically and say, how do I make a good place? How do I make atmosphere? That's where we get to the real strong places.
Yeah. One of the last questions is about your experience with teaching and about your methods. And I would like to add my question, if you think we should change the way how we teach landscape architecture.
It's again another one of those general things. Help me know how landscape is taught in Czech Republic. And then I can answer that better. I think landscape is taught very differently in every school, which makes it exciting. In the United States, you actually choose the school depending on the professors because they have different foci, and then you go to one school because it's, having this and this and this teacher, which will bring you this and this content, which I think is quite exciting because our profession, one thing that makes it exciting is the incredible diversity of topics. You can do large scale, small scale. I mean, choose many different emphases. And so the way we teach it becomes difficult. And I have talked quite a lot. The way we teach it is difficult because every school has to choose, because you can't teach everything. And you always end up leaving the program being acquainted with many things, but not being really good at everything. And I do think this becomes much easier, for example, in architecture. I mean, if there are any architects in the audience, I'm very closely tied to architecture, believe me. But at least you have certain parameters that are rather clear. Your sites always have a purpose. Someone tells you that's a bank and you need 12 toilets and you need 5 elevators and you need 22 offices and whatever. And then you decide, how do I want to articulate this in architecture? What facade do I want and what materials? What's the context, whatever. For landscape, we don't really have these kind of parameters. The goal of open space forever has been desire, longing, joy, meeting. I mean, these are very slippery topics that we are asked to deal with, and there's no clear definition of what they do or mean. And we don't have usually very clear programs unless you're doing a sports field or a cemetery or something. So how shall a school approach this problem? And I think every school in a certain way defines that in their best way. And if you're lucky, they're very good teachers and directors who are bringing across attitudes to the people. You need the skills, but you need also understanding and attitudes. And how do you combine all of this to be able to have a good foundation with which to go into the practice?
Do you have some bad or positive comments or reviews of your work from an ecological or biological point of view?
Bad experiences in which sense?
That maybe some changes in the landscape you made are not good from the ecological point of view, etc.
I like our profession because it's so complex that every answer to every question becomes complex. I mean, in that moment where we put in a green grass field and there was something that had more biodiversity before, it starts to hurt because actually you want that biodiversity. And then you've tried to plant a seed combination that has some natural, different kinds of flowers and so on. So maybe some bees would pass by or some flies or some worms. We're always fighting between what's appropriate for a certain place and what are the ecological goals. For example, how much ground you open up so the water can go through. I mean, even the term sustainability is quite complex because there's so many levels at which you can be sustainable. So we want to open up a lot of ground so the water goes through. We want to have fresh air passing through because of heat islands. Are we dealing with human needs like cooling in summer? Are we dealing with biodiversity? Are we dealing with the water cycle? Water cycle. So there's so many different aspects, but I think I commented in the Museum of Natural History about this hydrangea, where the ecologists were it's a very dogmatic ecological group called Poetics Pro Natura, and they were just, I mean, almost shaking because there were hydrangea, which is an exotic garden species, in this park of natural history, because they were sure that natural history has to just have these, like, 12 native plants and has to look ecological, and otherwise it's not. You can't even design otherwise. So they're very dogmatic attitudes about all this, and it kind of depends where you set your mark to know what you're fulfilling. But I think in the best case, we all are enough informed, and that's much easier these days than it used to be. And we all are watching in every project to do as much as we can. And in the Circle Park, for example, I mean, we really have to take a lot of care about not disturbing certain natural environments. And on the other side, they're in this completely weird, isolated fragment of landscape. And if we're really honest, that should better just become a park. So, but it's under national protection, so it can't. So you're kind of in a constant conflict, I would say, about these issues, and we have to make very careful judgments and very reflected judgments. Yeah.
Right. Last question for you is, how do you deal with the natural change of landscape? I guess this is the thing you love about your job, that you can't plan how the spot will look in 10 years. But how do you challenge, how do you deal with this, and how you plan that the nature will change your projects and your designs and your ideas?
Yes, super important question. I think in the first project I showed, the Tony School of the Arts, we can see how it changes, but at some point that also, this is one of the most interesting questions of our profession, and it's asked fairly often because there's not even a good answer. Every landscape except, how could I say, I think there's one woods in Poland, Bialowice, which is not really maintained. And otherwise, every space probably any of us have ever been to is maintained. So landscape only exists when it's maintained. So even if it's a woodland, the woodland only looks the way it looks because it's maintained a certain way. So every landscape that we're looking at is being maintained and controlled in some way by some criteria from somebody. If it's natural preservationists, if it's foresters, if it's a golf course, whatever it is, it's being maintained by somebody, and that is a vision of what this landscape should do. So people ask about the Museum of Natural History, for example. It's going to change over the years, the entire time, and we ask that we're involved in the first 3 years to see how it's changing. And after that, it's kind of going to become what it becomes, and then you have the competition. So maybe one plant species will die out, another will die out, and the other will take over, and it will be a weed, or it will be an exotic, and it won't be native. And then somebody has to have their foot in there saying, where's this journey going? And that's true of every single landscape. So we're quite interested in transformation, but we used to kind of have this more idealistic thing. Nature transforms, and then the landscape architect or the designer kind of suffocates this natural development to the will of their beauty design. And now we understand, because we've worked now with a lot of foresters and ecologists, for example, for the park. And we've come to understand that all of these landscapes are maintained. And the question is, who's doing it, with which criteria? And in the best case, and that's why the focus of this lecture tonight about experience, in the best case, the experience in the atmosphere are equal criteria to the ecological or uses and so on.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us for your lecture. It was really amazing. I'm really happy that you showed us your amazing project. It was an honor for me to talk to you, and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night to all of you. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in Prague sometime.
Great. Goodbye.
Bye.
To byla profesorka Robin Winogrond ze studia Vulkan Landscape Architect. Pokud chcete vidět záznam, můžete si ho pustit hned teďka na Facebooku, hned po skončení živého přenosu. nebo si ho můžete pustit během několika dní na YouTube, tam ho uvidíte i v lepší kvalitě. Na campuj.online už teďka můžete najít program dalších akcí. Je tam online přednáška, jak psát o architektuře s Karolínou Vránkovou. To je taková alternativa za to, že jsme museli posunout náš kurz o psaní o architektuře, který ona právě vede. Posunuli jsme ho na září, takže pokud jste se nestihli přihlásit, možná se tam nějaké místo potom uvolní, případně můžeme vypsat další termín, uvidíme. Taky se setkáme nad vodou, Rethink Architecture, je další cyklus přednášek, který zde v kempu uvádíme. Tentokrát bude tématem voda. My už jsme se tady bavili o udržitelné architektuře, o přírodě ve městě. Tam jsme se bavili hodně o tom, jak stromy a příroda jsou součástí architektury a zda architektura se nestrácí trošku pod tím přívalem přírody, který se teďka snažíme do ní vnést. Zjistili jsme, že ne, že je to potřeba a že se akorát musíme naučit, jak to formovat. Takže tentokrát bude tématem voda. Bude to jak dešťová voda, tak správa vody v domech a její šetření a tak dále. Takže na to vás určitě zvu. Zmiňoval jsem i kemping se sourozenci Třeštíkovými, což bude určitě velice zajímavé a zábavné. Takže uvidíme se příští týden u dalšího programu. Dneska se s vámi loučím, mějte se krásně a buďte na sebe hodní.